Okay, chat, hear me out. Let's begin with something I don't usually say. I was wrong. It doesn't happen often, but it's important to own up to it. Resident Evil 1 HD isn't nearly as bad as I made it sound in my Resident Evil 2 video. Sure, it's still a little rough around the edges, but once you understand the rules of survival horror, the game's design philosophy starts to make a lot more sense. Hello, it's Mateo Vert, your favorite backlog gamer. If you enjoy first playthroughs and retrospectives, you are in the right place. Stick around as we wander through the Spencer Mansion. Let's begin. Okay, time for Vert to educate ya. The original Resident Evil was released in 1996 and is often treated as the beginning of survival horror, but it wasn't technically the first. Capcom's own Sweet Home laid some of the foundation back in 1989. It featured a group of characters trapped inside a mansion, limited supplies, puzzles, scattered notes, backtracking, and is any of this sounding familiar to you? Then, Alone in the Dark came around 1992 with 3D characters, fixed camera angles, cinematic backgrounds, and a mansion filled with monsters and puzzles. So no, Resident Evil didn't invent all these ideas. What it did was combine them, refine them, and throw in some George Romero-inspired zombies and introduce the concept to a much larger audience. It even welcomed players into the world of survival horror, helping give the genre the name we still use today. Resident Evil established a formula built around vulnerability. You weren't supposed to enter every room with enough ammunition to kill everything. Every bullet, healing item, and inventory slot mattered. Running away wasn't cowardice, it was resource management. That philosophy would influence everything from Silent Hill to Dead Space, and nearly every horror game that has ever forced you to question whether that one hallway is really worth wasting those 3 shotgun shells. And while the original Resident Evil helped establish the blueprint, the 2002 remake took the same foundation and rebuilt it into the version that I finally experienced through Resident Evil HD. For the uninitiated, Resident Evil follows the members of STARS, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service. After a series of strange disappearances and gruesome murders around Raccoon City, Bravo Team is sent to investigate. When contact with them is lost, Alpha Team heads out to find them. This eventually leads everyone to the Spencer Mansion, where we quickly discover that not all its residents are human. You could even say that they're evil residents now. You could play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. They each have their own advantages and disadvantages. I finished my first playthrough as Chris, and I'm currently making my way through the game again as Jill. In this game though, they both have fairly straightforward personalities. They aren't nearly as memorable here as they become in later Resident Evil games. Chris is the determined action hero. Jill is the calm and capable one. There isn't much more to either of them, at least not yet. And how can I forget Albert Wesker? Wesker is the captain of STARS, but surprise, he's also working for Umbrella. He lured everyone into the mansion so their encounters with its biological experiments could provide valuable combat data for his personal creation, the Tyrant. Unfortunately for Wesker, releasing the Tyrant doesn't go according to plan. The Tyrant turns on him, gives him the business, and leaves him looking pretty dead. At least in the RE sense. We eventually defeat the Tyrant, escape the mansion, and fly away as the entire place explodes behind us. There's more to the story, including Umbrella's experiments, the mansion's history, and what happened to Bravo Team. But let's be honest, we're here for zombies, monsters, and whatever biological horrors are waiting behind that next loading screen. Outside of Resident Evil 7, this might be the only Resident Evil game I've played that I found genuinely scary. When I'm playing something like Resident Evil 4, it's hard to be afraid when Leon could just roundhouse kick all his problems away. Resident Evil 1 does not give you that kind of power, at least not in the beginning. Even the regular zombies can be dangerous, but they're far from the worst thing wandering around the mansion. You have zombie dogs crashing through windows, you have giant spiders, you have evil plants, you have hunters leaping across the room to separate your head from your shoulders, and then you have Crimson Heads. What's a Crimson Head? Oh, that's just the zombie you killed 15 minutes ago coming back faster, stronger, and ready to kick your teeth in. It turns out that killing a zombie doesn't necessarily solve your problem. Sometimes you're just scheduling a much worse problem for later. Unless you destroy his head or burn the corpse, that zombie may eventually become a Crimson Head. This means every encounter forces you to make a decision. Do I waste ammunition killing it? Do I use kerosene to burn the body? Or do I leave it alive and hope that I can keep slipping past it for the rest of the game? These decisions are what keeps the early sections dynamic. And those aren't even the biggest threats. You have a giant snake, a megalodon, and Lisa Trevor. She deserved better. The Spencer Mansion makes the Baker family farm look like Disneyland. Resident Evil feels like Fright Fest the game. But this is also what finally changed my mind about it. As you explore deeper into the mansion and survive increasingly dangerous enemies, you develop a genuine sense of accomplishment. You never know what the game will throw at you next, but you slowly become more confident that you can handle it. Well, mostly. I still panicked when them hunters showed up. While I wouldn't call Resident Evil easy, it's an older game, so it's definitely challenging. You just have to understand its design philosophy and accept that modern games have spoiled us a little bit. One of the biggest complaints people have about classic Resident Evil is that you cannot move while shooting. At first that feels clunky and outdated, but it's intentional. The game wants you to think about positioning. You have to create distance, choose when to stand your ground, and know when it's better to run. Combat isn't always about having fast reflexes. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is avoid the fight completely. Leaving zombies alive saves ammunition, and it prevents another Crimson Head from joining the mansion's growing list of problems. All this emphasizes the survival in survival horror. That doesn't mean every part of the game's design has aged perfectly though. Some of these puzzles are obtuse as hell. The puzzle where you have to replace the armor key with an imitation key before the walls crush you comes to my mind. Maybe the clues were obvious to everyone else, but I went through the American education system, so I was fighting for my life. Still, once I stopped treating Resident Evil like an action game and started respecting it as a survival game, everything began to click. The awkward shooting became deliberate positioning, running away became a strategy, limited inventory became preparation, and every trip through the mansion became another test of whether I had actually learned anything. Resident Evil doesn't make you feel powerful by letting you destroy everything in your path until New Game Plus. It makes you feel powerful by convincing you that you might not survive and then forcing you to nut up and prove that you can. To sum everything up, despite some awkwardness, I absolutely recommend Resident Evil HD to modern Resident Evil fans. Yes, it may take a little effort before everything clicks, but once it does, and once you finish that first playthrough, you might immediately feel tempted to start another one. Resident Evil games have always rewarded your foreknowledge. This one is no different. You remember which enemies you can avoid, which items you'll need, and which hallways are about to become someone else's problem. Suddenly, the mansion that once felt overwhelming becomes something you know how to survive. And honestly, I don't think this game needs some remake in Unreal Engine 5. Modern visuals and controls would make it more accessible, but could also remove some of its charm. The fixed camera angles, limited movement, and slower pace are all essential to what makes this version work. Now, Code Veronica though, that game could use some help. Now, I guess Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil 9 are the last mainline games I need to cover. This feels so surreal. I do plan on making a video about Resident Evil 4 Remake at some point, as soon as Leon stops walking into every bear trap he sees. But the next victim being removed from my backlog is Alan Wake 2, which we currently are playing over on Twitch, so come over and say hi. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and do all the other YouTube stuff. And until next time, it's Mateo Vert, your favorite backlog gamer, and you guys stay safe.